February 14th, Valentine's Day. A day filled with love, joy, and heartfelt moments. A day for love. But for Emily, a young nurse from Ohio, this Valentine's Day would be seared into her memory for all the wrong reasons. The day had started like any other, but little did she know, it would end in a way she could never have imagined. It was a bitterly cold night. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the hospital. The snowstorm was relentless, creating an eerie atmosphere that seemed to seep into the very walls of the building. Inside, Emily was finishing up her shift, her heart heavy with a sense of unease. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but something felt off. Emily was a kind and compassionate nurse. Her dedication to her patients was unwavering, and she always went the extra mile to ensure their comfort. At 28, she had dedicated her life to caring for others. Her career was her passion, and she found immense joy in helping those in need. Her patients adored her warm smile and gentle touch. They often said that her presence alone was enough to make them feel better. But tonight, a shadow seemed to hang over her. The usual warmth in her heart was replaced by a cold, gnawing worry. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. The unease grew stronger with each passing minute. Emily had been looking forward to a quiet Valentine's Day dinner with her boyfriend Mark. They had planned it for weeks, and she had been counting down the days. He was a carpenter, and his thoughtful gifts always made her feel special. His hands, rough from work, crafted the most delicate and beautiful things. This year, he had promised her a surprise. She had been eagerly anticipating what he had in store for her. But as the hours ticked by, her phone remained silent. The silence was deafening, and her worry turned into a deep sense of dread. The drive home was always peaceful, a time when Emily could unwind from the day's events. Emily enjoyed the quiet time to reflect on her day, the hum of the engine and the crunch of snow under the tires providing a soothing backdrop. But tonight the silence was unnerving, a stark contrast to the usual tranquility she cherished. The roads were deserted, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the trees, creating an eerie melody. Emily turned up the radio, hoping to drown out the silence that seemed to grow louder with each passing mile. A love song filled the car, but it did little to ease her anxiety, the lyrics only reminding her of Mark. She glanced at her phone again, hoping for a message, a missed call, anything. Still no word from Mark, the empty screen staring back at her like a void. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. Where could he be? Why hadn't he called? The questions echoed in her mind. As she drove further into the countryside, the streetlights became sparse, the darkness more oppressive. The darkness outside seemed to press in on the car, amplifying her fear and making her feel even more isolated. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of her growing anxiety. She just wanted to get home, to the safety of her little cottage, where she could finally feel at ease. Suddenly, Emily slammed on the brakes. Her headlights illuminated a figure in the middle of the road. A man, tall and wearing dark clothes, stood motionless. He wasn't moving, wasn't even looking at her car. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her pulse quickened. Who was this man, and what was he doing standing in the road like that? She cautiously inched the car forward, her hand hovering over the horn. As she got closer, the man turned his head slowly. His face was obscured by the shadows, but Emily could sense his eyes on her. A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't wait any longer. Emily hit the gas, swerving around the man. She glanced in her rearview mirror. The man was gone. When Emily finally pulled into her driveway, relief washed over her. She was home, but something wasn't right. The front door was slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out into the darkness. Emily's heart sank. She knew Mark was home. He never left the door unlocked. Fear gnawed at her insides. She called out his name, her voice trembling. "Mark, are you here?" Silence. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Emily cautiously stepped inside, her hand reaching for the phone in her pocket. She dialed 911, her finger poised over the call button. The house was dark and eerily quiet. Emily's call connected, and she whispered her address to the operator, her voice barely a whisper. She made her way through the house, her heart pounding with each step. She found no sign of Mark. But in the kitchen, she noticed something strange. The back door, usually bolted shut, was wide open. Fresh snow covered the porch, and in the snow she saw footprints. Large footprints, leading into the woods behind their house. Fear propelled Emily forward. She had to find Mark. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and followed the footprints. The woods were dark and silent, the trees like looming shadows. The footprints led deeper and deeper into the woods. The trees thinned and Emily emerged into a small clearing. And there, in the center of the clearing, she saw him, Mark. He was bound and gagged, lying on the ground. Standing over him was the man from the road. The man turned, and Emily could see his face clearly now. He was younger than she thought, with cold, calculating eyes. "Mark!" Emily screamed, rushing towards them. The man turned, startled by her sudden appearance. Mark struggled against his restraints, his eyes wide with terror. Emily brandished the poker, her fear giving way to anger. Suddenly, headlights pierced the darkness, cutting through the thick veil of snow that had blanketed the town. A police car, sirens blaring, skidded to a stop at the edge of the clearing, its lights reflecting off the snow. The man froze, his eyes darting between Emily and the approaching officers, fear evident in his every movement. Then, with a swift movement, he turned and disappeared into the trees, his footsteps muffled by the snow. The police apprehended Mark's attacker after a short chase, their breaths visible in the cold night air. He was a drifter passing through town, a shadow in the night. They never determined his motive, why he targeted Mark, leaving everyone with more questions than answers. But the trauma of that night lingered, casting a long shadow over their lives. Emily and Mark tried to move on, but the fear remained, a constant companion in their quiet moments. The feeling of being watched, the unease and the quiet of their home, never truly left them. Their Valentine's Day nightmare was a stark reminder that even in the safest of places, darkness can lurk, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes the monsters are real, hiding in plain sight, waiting to strike. The air was crisp and cool in the Oregon suburbs. The sky was a deep, dark blue. Stars twinkled like distant diamonds. It was Valentine's Day. Love was in the air, but something else hung there too. Something unsettling. The streetlights cast an orange glow on the sidewalks. The houses were decorated with hearts and flowers, but behind one window a shadow lurked. A story was about to unfold. One of love and loss, a story for Valentine's Day. Sarah adjusted her dress as she walked towards Jake's doorstep. They had been dating for 6 months. Tonight was their first Valentine's Day together. Excitement bubbled inside her. He had promised her a special evening. She rang the doorbell. There was no answer. She rang again. Still no answer. Maybe he was running late. She took out her phone to call him. But before she could, the door creaked open. It was unlocked. Sarah stepped inside, calling out Jake's name. The house greeted her with an eerie silence, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. She hesitated for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob, before stepping further into the dimly lit hallway. "Jake, are you here?" Her voice echoed in the silence, bouncing off the walls and returning to her in a haunting manner. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The house was dimly lit. A strange stillness hung in the air, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Shadows danced in the corners, creating an unsettling atmosphere that made her heart race. It wasn't like Jake to be late, let alone leave the door unlocked. She frowned, her mind racing with possibilities. Had he forgotten something and left in a hurry? Or was there something more sinister at play? She noticed 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. One was half full. The sight of the glasses made her stomach churn. Who had been here with Jake? And why had they left so abruptly? There was a plate with crumbs from what looked like takeout, the remnants of a meal hastily consumed. She could almost picture the scene. 2 people sitting here, sharing a meal, before something interrupted them. But something was off. The room was in disarray. Books were scattered on the floor, a chair was overturned, and a lamp lay on its side. It was as if a struggle had taken place, as if someone had left in a hurry. The unsettling feeling in her gut grew stronger. She knew she had to find Jake, and fast. Something was terribly wrong. If you're enjoying this mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling content. Sarah walked towards the bedroom, her unease growing with every step. The hallway seemed longer than usual, each shadow more menacing. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a stark contrast to the silence that awaited her. Each creak of the floorboard sent a shiver down her spine. The sound echoed in the stillness, amplifying her anxiety. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally summoning the courage to proceed. She pushed open the bedroom door. The hinges groaned in protest, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The room was cloaked in darkness, save for a faint glow from the bedside lamp. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into darkness, except for a faint glow from the bedside lamp. There he was, Jake, lying on the bed. His face was serene, almost too serene, as if he were merely in a deep sleep. He looked like he was sleeping. But something was wrong. He wasn't moving. The usual rise and fall of his chest was absent, and the room felt colder than it should. His chest wasn't rising and falling. Fear gripped her heart. She felt a lump form in her throat, her mind racing with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She rushed to his side. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch him, hoping for a sign of life, a flicker of movement, anything to dispel the dread that had settled over her. Jake, wake up. Sarah shook him, her voice shrill with panic. But he didn't respond. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing in as her desperation grew. His skin was cold to the touch. It was as if life had already slipped away from him, leaving behind a shell. The realization hit her like a tidal wave, threatening to pull her under. She felt for a pulse, but there was none. Her mind raced. What could have happened? How could this be? She had to think fast, but her thoughts were a jumbled mess. She didn't know what to do. The fear was paralyzing, gripping her with icy fingers. She felt utterly helpless, standing there in the middle of the room, her mind spinning. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the ringing of the doorbell. It startled her. The sound was jarring, pulling her out of her daze. Who could it be at this hour, and what would she say? She didn't want to answer. Fear gripped her heart even tighter. What if it was someone who could help? Or worse, what if it was someone who would make things even more complicated? She just wanted to leave. The urge to flee was overwhelming. She needed to get out, to find help, to escape the suffocating fear that was closing in on her. She had to get help. Without another thought, she bolted for the door, her mind set on finding someone, anyone, who could save Jake. She ran out of the house and into the cold night. The chill bit at her skin, but she didn't care. All that mattered was getting help, and fast. The night seemed endless, but she kept running, driven by the hope that she could still save him. The police arrived quickly. Sirens wailed, breaking the silence of the night. The flashing red and blue lights painted an eerie scene. Sarah watched from a distance, her body still trembling with shock. The investigation revealed no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. The cause of death was inconclusive. It was like Jake had simply stopped living. The mystery of his death hung heavy in the air. It was a question with no answers. Years have passed. Sarah still lives with the memory of that night, the chilling discovery, the unanswered questions. Every Valentine's Day she remembers Jake, the man who promised her a special evening, and every Valentine's Day, a mysterious package arrives on her doorstep. No sender's name, no return address, just a small, unopened box tied with a red ribbon. A chilling reminder of the Valentine's Day mystery she can never truly leave behind. It was Valentine's Day. She was excited. She was going to meet Chris at his place for dinner. Chris was her new boyfriend. They met a few months ago at a bookstore. He was charming and funny. They had been on a few dates. She really liked him. She drove to Chris's house in rural Pennsylvania. It was a cold night. The roads were icy. The wind howled outside. It was already dark. She hoped Chris had the fireplace going. She pulled up to Chris's house. It was a charming farmhouse. It looked old but well kept. There was a porch swing and a tire swing hanging from a large oak tree in the yard. She smiled. Chris had told her about spending his summers on that swing as a child. She was a little bit nervous. This was her first time going to Chris's house. She took a deep breath and got out of the car. She walked up to the front door and rang the doorbell. There was no answer. She knocked on the door. Still no answer. She tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. She cautiously stepped inside. "Chris?" she called out. The house was dark and quiet. It felt cold and empty. She turned on the lights in the hallway. She noticed that the house was very neat. There was no sign of Chris. She started to feel uneasy. Where could he be? She called Chris's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. She left a message. "Hey Chris, it's me. I'm at your house. Where are you?" She hung up the phone. She decided to look around. Maybe Chris left her a note or something. She walked down the hallway to the living room. She stopped short. Something was wrong. There were photos all over the walls. Photos of her. She felt a chill run down her spine. How did these get here? Who put them up? She looked closer at the photos. They were all taken without her knowledge. There were photos of her at work, at the grocery store, at the gym. There were even photos of her inside her apartment. Her heart started to race. Someone had been stalking her. She saw that the photos were connected by red string. She followed the string to a table in the center of the room. On the table was a stack of notebooks. She hesitantly picked up one of the notebooks. She opened it up and started to read. The notebook was filled with Chris's handwriting. He had written about her in obsessive detail. He had described her every move. He had even fantasized about kidnapping her and keeping her locked up in his basement. She dropped the notebook in horror. She knew then that Chris was dangerous. She had to get out of there. She turned to run, but it was too late. Chris was standing in the doorway. He was holding a hunting knife. "Going somewhere, Lisa?" Chris asked. He smiled a cruel smile. She backed away from Chris. "Don't come any closer," she said. Her voice was trembling. "But Lisa," Chris said, "I thought we were going to spend Valentine's Day together." He took a step closer. She could see the madness in his eyes. Lisa's heart pounded as she backed away, her mind racing for a way out. She glanced around the room, searching for something, anything she could use to defend herself. Chris took another step forward, the knife glinting in the dim light. "Lisa." "Chris, please. I don't know what's going on, but we can talk about this." Chris chuckled, a cold, hollow sound that sent chills down her spine. "Chris." "Oh, Lisa, I've been waiting for this night. You don't understand how perfect we're going to be together." No one else matters, just you and me. Lisa's eyes darted to the hallway. If she could make it to the front door, she might have a chance. She took a slow step backward, her gaze never leaving Chris. Chris. Don't run, Lisa. I don't want to hurt you. But if you try to leave... Lisa forced herself to stay calm. She needed to distract him. Lisa. Chris, you don't have to do this. We can work this out. Let's sit down and talk. Chris paused, his brow furrowing as if he were considering her words. Chris, talk? Lisa, yes. Let's just sit and talk. I want to understand. For a moment, Chris hesitated, and Lisa thought she might have gotten through to him. But then his eyes narrowed, and his cruel smile returned. Chris? Nice try. Without thinking, Lisa grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp from the table, and hurled it at Chris. It struck his arm, and he stumbled back with a grunt of pain. Seizing the opportunity, Lisa bolted down the hallway. She could hear Chris's footsteps pounding behind her as she reached the front door. Her hands fumbled with the lock, her fingers trembling in desperation. Chris, OS, Lisa. The lock finally gave way, and Lisa yanked the door open. She sprinted out into the icy night, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She didn't dare look back as she ran toward her car. She could hear Chris shouting behind her, but his voice grew fainter as she reached the vehicle. Her frozen fingers fumbled with the keys, but she managed to unlock the door and climb inside. Chris burst out of the house, his knife gleaming in the moonlight. Lisa slammed the car door shut and started the engine. Chris lunged toward the car, but the tires spun on the icy driveway before finding traction. The car lurched forward, and Lisa sped away. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the steering wheel, tears streaming down her face. She didn't stop driving until she reached a gas station miles away. There, she called the police and told them everything. By the time the authorities arrived at Chris's house, he was gone. They found the photos, the notebooks, and evidence of his obsession with Lisa. A manhunt was launched, but Chris seemed to have vanished without a trace. Lisa couldn't sleep for weeks, haunted by the memory of that night. She moved to a new city and changed her phone number, hoping to put as much distance as possible between herself and Chris. But sometimes, late at night, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her.